The old sedan coughed and sputtered, its headlights cutting weak, jaundiced beams through the thick, inky blackness of the night. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the already faint lines of the deserted highway. Inside, the driver, a man named Arthur, hunched over the wheel, eyes gritty from hours of relentless driving. He'd missed the last town, miles back, and desperation gnawed at him. That's when the sign loomed out of the downpour, a flickering neon skeleton against the dark. Last Night Motel. The T in motel hung crooked, barely clinging to its frame. A chill, unrelated to the rain, traced its way down his spine. It looked like something out of a forgotten film reel, a relic from a different, perhaps darker era. The kind of place you drove past, not into. But the gas tank needle hovered precariously on E, and his eyelids felt like sandpaper. He took the turn, tires crunching on gravel. The motel office glowed faintly, a single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows. No other cars, not one. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof and the distant croak of something unseen in the murky wetlands beyond. He sat there for a moment, just breathing, the uneasy feeling twisting in his gut. This was a bad idea. Every fiber of his being screamed it. But fatigue was a powerful, insidious persuader. Stepping out, the rain instantly soaked his thin jacket. The air was heavy, damp, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of stagnant water and something else. Something metallic and vaguely acrid. He jogged to the office door, pushing it open. A rusty bell above chimed a weak, mournful note. The lobby was something else. Dimly lit, dusty, and cold. The kind of cold that seeped into your bones, not from temperature, but from a profound emptiness. An ancient, moth-eaten rug covered the floor, its patterns long faded into obscurity. Behind a chipped wooden counter, a figure sat. It wasn't moving. Arthur cleared his throat. No response. He cleared it again, louder this time. Still nothing. Just the rhythmic tick of an old, ornate grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum swinging with a hypnotic slowness that felt off. Too slow. "Hello?" Arthur called out, his voice sounding thin and small in the vast, still space. The figure stirred. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it raised its head. It was an old woman, her face a map of deep wrinkles, her eyes sunken, vast pools of shadow. Her skin was a pallid, almost translucent white. She didn't blink, didn't move beyond that single glacial gesture. She just stared at him, those dark eyes holding an unnerving stillness. It was like looking into the eyes of something that had seen too much or nothing at all. "Room?" Her voice was a dry, brittle whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It barely carried through the silence. Arthur managed a nod. Just for the night. One room. She turned, her movements stiff, mechanical, and reached for a rack of keys behind her. Her hand was gnarled, skeletal. She picked one, the metal glinting briefly in the dim light, and placed it on the counter. Room 13. Of course. Room 13. He paid her, his fingers fumbling with the damp bills. He tried to meet her gaze again, to offer a polite thank you, but her eyes were already fixed on some invisible point beyond him, vacant once more. The key felt heavy in his palm, strangely cold, as if it had been buried in ice. Outside, the rain had softened to a persistent drizzle. The motel rooms formed a long, low block, their windows dark, uninviting eyes. Room 13 was at the very end, furthest from the office, tucked away in the shadows. A single, sickly yellow light above the door buzzed with a low electrical hum. The lock groaned as he turned the key, a sound of ancient metal protesting. The door scraped open on rusty hinges, revealing a cavity of darkness. He reached inside, fumbling for a light switch, and found it. The single overhead bulb flickered, then grudgingly illuminated the room in a sickly, jaundiced glow. The room was as depressing as he'd imagined. A faded floral wallpaper peeled in strips near the ceiling. A lumpy, stained bed occupied the center, its sheets a questionable shade of off-white. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else. Something sickly sweet, like decaying flowers. The window, grimy and streaked, looked out onto a dense, overgrown patch of shrubs that pressed close to the building, their branches scratching softly against the glass. He dropped his worn duffel bag onto the floor, the sound echoing hollowly. He wanted a shower, a warm bed, anything to wash away the creeping unease. But something in the room made him hesitate. A large, dark stain on the carpet by the foot of the bed, shaped vaguely like a Rorschach blot, drew his eye. He tried not to think about what it could be. He checked the bathroom. Tiny, with a cracked sink and a shower curtain that looked like it hadn't been changed since the motel was built. He decided against the shower. Too much effort. Too much risk. He just wanted to sleep. As he lay on the bed, fully clothed, the springs groaning beneath him, the silence pressed in. It wasn't empty silence. It was a pregnant silence, filled with unspoken things. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come. Then it started. A faint scratching sound, rhythmic, insistent, like tiny claws dragging across a wooden surface from inside the walls. He opened his eyes. Nothing. Just the dim light, the oppressive stillness. He tried to tell himself it was mice. Old motels had mice. Of course. The scratching continued, moving. First from the wall behind the headboard, then towards the window, then above him. It wasn't the skittering of a rodent. This was too deliberate, too slow, too rhythmic. He held his breath, straining to hear. Then came the whispers, so faint, so breathy. He almost convinced himself it was the wind, or the rain, or his tired mind playing tricks. But they were there, weaving in and out of the scratching, just at the edge of comprehension, like distant, forgotten lullabies, or desperate, unheard pleas. He couldn't make out words, but the cadence was unnerving. A sigh, a mournful moan. He sat up, his heart thudding against his ribs. This was not mice. This was not the wind. He tried to find the source, his gaze sweeping the shadowy corners of the room. Nothing moved. Yet the sounds persisted, now seeming to come from everywhere at once, surrounding him. The temperature in the room plummeted. A sudden, biting cold, far beyond what the damp night air outside could account for. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter. His breath plumed in the frigid air. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, just outside his door. A heavy, deliberate sound, like someone slowly shifting their weight. He froze, muscles tensed, listening. Another creak. Closer. And another. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps, passing his door. Then stopping. Right outside. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to rationalize. Another guest, maybe. Just another guest. But he hadn't seen any other cars. The old woman hadn't mentioned anyone else. And the footsteps, they didn't sound right. Too heavy. Too soft somehow, despite the creak. Like something vast and formless was pressing against the floor. A faint gasp escaped him as a shadow, impossibly deep and elongated, stretched across the bottom of his door, slipping under the crack. It was far too large to be a human shadow. It stretched and warped, then slowly, agonizingly slowly, receded back into the darkness. He bolted upright, scrambling off the bed, his back pressed against the cold wall. His eyes darted around the room. The shadows were dancing, twisting in the corners, lengthening, shortening, as if an invisible light source was moving. The old, cheap mirror above the dresser seemed to glimmer with a faint, internal light, reflecting not his terrified face, but something else. A fleeting, indistinct shape. He heard the faint, wet sound of a drip, drip, drip. He looked towards the bathroom, thinking it was a leaky faucet. But the sound wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the ceiling, directly above the bed. He looked up. Nothing. But then a dark, spreading stain began to appear on the faded wallpaper, directly above where his head had been. It grew rapidly, the dark liquid soaking into the plaster, spreading outwards like a morbid flower. And the dripping sound grew louder, more insistent. A single, small, crimson droplet detached itself from the spreading stain and splattered onto the pristine, white pillowcase. Blood. It was blood. A guttural, silent scream tore through him. He had to get out. Now. He lunged for his duffel bag, grabbing it blindly, not caring about its contents. He stumbled towards the door, his heart hammering, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob, cold metal against his sweaty palm. He twisted, locked. He twisted harder, frantic now. It wouldn't budge. He pulled, pushed, rattled it with all his might. The lock held firm, an immovable, malicious entity. The whispers intensified, rising from a murmur to a chorus, swirling around him, filling the room. He could almost discern words now, ancient, guttural sounds, speaking of pain, of longing, of being trapped. They seemed to come from the very air, from the walls, from the floor, beneath his feet. He spun around, eyes wide with terror. The room was no longer just a room. The shadows had deepened, coalesced, forming indistinct, shifting shapes in the corners. Figures, or illusions of figures, seemed to writhe and sway just beyond his peripheral vision. He glimpsed a gaunt, elongated hand reaching out from the wall, its fingers tipped with impossible, razor-sharp nails, before it dissolved back into the plaster. The bed seemed to sag, as if an unseen weight had settled onto it. The sheets, still stained with blood, seemed to ripple and twitch. He could feel an oppressive presence, vast and cold, bearing down on him. He staggered backward, away from the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He backed into the dresser, knocking over a cheap lamp. It crashed to the floor, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the faint, malevolent glow from the window and the sickly light bleeding from the deepening bloodstain on the ceiling remained. Through the window, beyond the pressing shrubs, he saw them. Faint, ghostly figures, shimmering in the rain-streaked darkness. They were transparent, barely there, but unmistakably human-shaped. They drifted through the parking lot, past the other dark rooms, their faces indistinct blurs of agony. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at the motel, at his room, their ethereal hands reaching out, as if begging for release, or perhaps for him to join them. A sudden, sharp tug on his ankle. He cried out, stumbling, falling to the floor. Something cold and unseen was dragging him, slowly, inexorably, towards the stain on the carpet, towards the darkness beneath the bed. He clawed at the floorboards, scraping his nails raw, his body writhing in a desperate struggle. The whispers became a roar, an echoing cacophony of suffering and rage. The air grew thick, pressing in on him, making it hard to breathe. The smell of decay became overwhelming, cloying, filling his lungs. He saw it then, in the deepening darkness beneath the bed. Something vast and formless, like an endless void, but with glinting, ancient eyes that fixed on him, pulling him closer. The stain on the carpet seemed to open, the dark liquid swirling, becoming a maw. He was being drawn into it, into the heart of the motel's unspeakable horror. He screamed, a raw, primal sound ripped from his throat, but it was swallowed by the overwhelming noise of the trapped voices, the scratching, the dripping. His fingers lost their grip on the splintered wood. He felt himself sliding, his body giving way to the cold, insatiable pull from below. A final, desperate glimpse of the window, of the ghostly figures outside, their faces contorted in silent, eternal anguish, their hands still reaching. They weren't begging for release. They were waiting, waiting for him. The darkness consumed him. The last thing he heard, echoing, reverberating in the collapsing space around him, was the slow, deliberate tick of the grandfather clock from the lobby, each beat sounding like a final, dreadful nail hammered into a coffin. The cold silence descended once more upon room 13. Undisturbed, save for the faint, continuous drip, drip, drip from the ceiling, and the occasional, almost imperceptible scratch from within the walls. The Last Night Motel sign flickered outside, waiting for the next weary traveler.